Dorothy and her husband Michael split up a few months after their son Aiden was born. The separation was difficult as the couple wasn't on good terms. That made the situation with their baby even more difficult. But luckily, the couple managed to reach an agreement that would make both of them and their son happy. The agreement was that Aiden would rotate between his parents. Michael would have him for 1 week, and Dorothy would have him the following week. That way, they got to spend equal time with him, and he got to grow up with both his parents. But one day, Dorothy noticed something that had her questioning her ex's motives. Aiden was spending the week with her when she noticed him doing something incredibly odd. At about midday, Aiden walked into the living room, pulled on his pants, and stared into them. Dorothy watched him for a moment and continued what she was doing, thinking he would continue playing. But he didn't. He just stood there, staring into his pants, for half an hour. Dorothy brushed it off when he went about his day, thinking it was nothing serious. But the next day, it happened again, and again the day after that. For the whole week that Aiden spent with his mother, he would stop and stare into his pants for half an hour. The behavior was definitely new, and it got Dorothy thinking. Aiden was a curious little boy. It might have been due to his age, but he was fascinated by everything he saw, and often had a cute response to that. Dorothy wondered if this staring had something to do with his curiosity, but when it happened again on his next visit, she decided to give him a once-over just in case. Dorothy laid Aiden down and checked his legs, but nothing indicated that something was bothering him. The fact that she didn't find anything left Dorothy stunned. There must be a reason for Aiden staring like that. It couldn't just be a coincidence, and curiosity would have had him moving on the moment he saw what he wanted to see. The next day, the same thing happened, and again it was around lunchtime. It was 12:13 p.m. to be exact. Dorothy wondered if it had something to do with the time, so she checked again the next day. At exactly 12:13 p.m., Aiden walked into the living room, pulled on his pants, and stared at whatever it was that intrigued him. After Aiden went back to his father's house, Dorothy was visited by her friend Olivia. Dorothy was still trying to figure out what was happening with her son and mentioned his odd behavior to her friend. After Olivia heard the whole story, she said something that had Dorothy suspecting her ex-husband. Could he be responsible for what was happening to her son? Dorothy got a new boyfriend a few weeks before Aiden started acting weird, and a few days after Michael found out about it, he slipped a letter into her mailbox. In the letter, he wrote many things that were meant to hurt her. But one thing stood out above the rest. He threatened to make her life miserable. Dorothy wondered if that could be why Aiden acted the way he did. Did his father teach him to do that so that she would be in a permanent state of worry? Or was there more to it? Could it be possible that he was using their son to spy on her? Dorothy didn't want to believe it, but Michael did seem very jealous of her new boyfriend and had already acted out once. The more she thought about it, the more realistic the spying thing sounded. Dorothy had a half-day job, and she got home just before noon. Aiden started acting strange at 12:13 p.m. By that time, she was already home, and Michael knew that. She was convinced that Michael had hidden a recording device or chip in Aiden's clothing, and that was why he was looking into his pants at the same time every day. But was she right? With that in mind, Dorothy picked up her son and took him to the changing station. She undressed him and checked his skin before turning her attention to his clothes. Now that she knew what she was looking for, it wouldn't be difficult to find. She searched every inch of his clothing and checked every seam, but she didn't find what she was looking for. Dorothy even went so far as to check Aiden's diaper, but the chip was nowhere to be found. There was only one place left: his shoes. After thoroughly examining his shoes, Dorothy was defeated. She couldn't find any sign of a chip. She just had to accept the fact that there was nothing there. Or was there? Even though Dorothy couldn't find any evidence, she was convinced that Michael was spying on her, and that he was using their son to do it. So she came up with an idea to catch him in his own trap. Dorothy was in the same room as Aiden when she picked up her phone and called the police. She told the police exactly what was happening, and they immediately sent officers out. Since there was an infant involved, the police didn't only come to her. While the officers came to her house, another unit was sent to Michael's place. He was arrested on the spot and taken in for questioning. What happened next left Dorothy utterly confused. The police dragged Michael to the police station, all while Dorothy sat smugly in her chair at home. She knew that Michael would be seriously questioning his decision to spy on her after the police got involved. But then, something completely unexpected happened. Dorothy had no idea the cops would come for her as well. Dorothy heard a knock on her door and had no idea why. She wasn't expecting any visitors, and she was in the middle of her revenge. Who dared interrupt her? She walked up to the door and looked through her peephole, but when she saw who was waiting outside for her, all of the blood in her body ran cold. Why were they here? The police were knocking on Dorothy's door. Why were they here for her? They were supposed to take Michael in, not her. She knew all she could do was let them in. "What can I do for you, officer?" The officer greeted her with a smile before telling her something she didn't expect. Would her suspicions about Michael be correct? The law enforcement officer explained to Dorothy what they had found out from her ex-husband. They had taken him to a holding room at the local precinct and started asking him questions with regard to the spying. But the strangest thing of all was how good he was at lying. He was very convinced at pretending he didn't know what was going on. But things weren't as they seemed. The officer told Dorothy that Michael was caught completely off guard by the arrest. He seemed oblivious to the fact that they were coming, and also had no idea what they were talking about when it came to any kind of spying. When they explained that they had reason to believe he had put a chip in his son's pants, he seemed taken aback. Was he really lying? Dorothy couldn't believe what she was hearing. Nothing made sense to her. If he really was eavesdropping on her, then he would have known the police were coming. Something wasn't right, and Dorothy felt frightened. Was Michael really that conniving? She'd soon learn exactly what her ex-husband was really capable of when it came down to it. The officer at Dorothy's house explained the real reason he was there. He told her that they had to take special measures to make sure that her son wasn't in any real danger. With her permission, the officer pulled out a special device to detect if there were any spy chips on her son. He said it would be harmless and only take a minute, but what would the officer find? The officer greeted young Aiden and asked him if he could scan him. Aiden giggled at the police officer and was more than happy to comply. After all, the young boy thought that it was nothing more than a game. The officer carefully scanned Aiden up and down with the scanner. After 5 minutes of looking for it, he made an insane discovery. The officer looked up at Dorothy, who was waiting with a nervous look on her face. The officer shook his head and said, "Well, it's good news. I can't find anything on your son." But this wasn't necessarily good news to her. Was there really nothing to worry about? Or was Michael more of a genius than she gave him credit for? The officer left Dorothy's house and told her he'd update her on any new details. Dorothy had time to think about what was really going on at that time. But just as she thought she would go insane from not knowing, she got an unexpected call. She thought it would be the authorities, but it wasn't. It was the last person that she thought she'd hear from. The phone call was from none other than her ex-husband, Michael. What could he have possibly wanted? Was he going to threaten her again or tell her that he was on to her? She didn't want to pick up the phone, but she had to know how much he knew. She sighed and picked up the phone, but she wouldn't be ready for what he had to say. She was ready for Michael's fury for calling the cops on him. But things took an unexpected turn when he started explaining what had happened to him. It seemed that he had no idea that it was Dorothy that was responsible for it. He asked her if the cops had also shown up at her doorstep asking about Aiden. She decided then and there to come clean. Dorothy explained that it was actually her that had called the cops on him. It was because of the threatening letter and the weird way that their son was acting. Naturally, she thought she'd better be safe than sorry. Upon hearing her reasoning, Michael did something out of left field that Dorothy never had in a million years thought he would do. Michael's next set of words took her aback. He actually apologized for everything. He explained that he had sent the letter in the heat of the moment and didn't actually mean what he said. As for the spy chip, he swore that he would never do anything like that to their son. But if it wasn't him, then what was going on with Aiden? Dorothy then asked a fateful question. Is he doing the same thing when he's with you?" To her surprise, he knew exactly what she was talking about. He told her that at around 12:13, Aiden would pull down his pants and stare down. That meant that it was something consistent that he did with both of them. But what was going on? This worried Dorothy even more now. She was back at square one, not knowing anything that was going on. She needed to figure out what was going on with her son, and quickly, for that matter. Without anyone else to turn to, she asked Michael what he thought about the whole situation. Then they thought of a potential solution. Aiden hated going to the doctor, but they needed to figure out what was up. Dorothy booked an appointment with her local doctor and took Aiden in to see him. Little Aiden was a nightmare getting into the car, but it was the only way. Once Dorothy and Aiden got to the doctor's office, they sat down in the examination room. The doctor prepared to examine her boy. The doctor distracted Aiden with a lollipop, telling him that if he made it through the examination, then he'd be able to keep it. His eyes lit up with joy, and he nodded enthusiastically. The doctor looked up and down and couldn't see any obvious signs of anything weird. He did a more thorough check, and after looking for 10 minutes, had some news to tell his concerned mother. "I'm happy to say that your young boy is perfectly fine and healthy. There was nothing to point to why he's picked up on this habit." The doctor recommended keeping an eye on him to see if she could figure out any other details. Dorothy left the office pretty disappointed. She had really hoped that the doctor would find something definitive. Dorothy watched Aiden carefully over the next few days. He would still do the same thing every day, like clockwork. There had to be something she was missing, but she had no idea what it was. Even Michael couldn't figure it out when Aiden was visiting him. Was it just something that kids his age did? Dorothy did some research online to figure out what kind of behavior would have been normal for little Aiden. She even borrowed a parenting book from the library to see if there would be any old-school explanations. After looking through everything she could, she came to a startling conclusion that only left her more heartbroken. Was this really everything? Every book and webpage came to the same conclusion. Aiden's behavior wasn't listed in any of the books or anything like it, for that matter. She had to accept the fact that her son just wasn't normal. But then her phone started ringing. She looked at the contact and saw that it was her doctor. What news would he have? The doctor told Dorothy that he wanted to see Aiden as soon as possible. They quickly arranged an appointment for the next day, but what had he found out about their son's behavior? Dorothy hoped for the breakthrough they were looking for, but she didn't expect a strange and unorthodox method, such as the one the doctor was going to use. She would have to wait one more day to figure out exactly what was wrong with her son. She felt even more nervous than before for some unexplained reason. Why would he be doing something as strange as looking into his pants every day? The answer would be revealed to Dorothy once she got to the doctor. The doctor had asked Dorothy for the appointment to be at noon. This meant that Dorothy had to get Aiden dressed up nicely and ready earlier than the boy liked. She would also have to buy him a lollipop to make him comply. Dorothy didn't initially think about the time too much at first, but she definitely would once she saw what the doctor's plan was. The two of them got to the doctor's office promptly at noon. They walked into the examination once more, but this time the doctor looked more concerned than before. What was he about to tell them? He sat on his chair and told Dorothy that he wanted to wait until the precise time that Aiden normally exhibited the strange behavior. The time slot made a lot more sense to Dorothy now. The doctor wanted to see what Aiden did for himself and perhaps diagnose him from there. 12:13 p.m. rolled around, and everyone watched Aiden carefully. He should have been acting like he normally did, but nothing happened. Why wasn't he doing what he normally did at 12:13? Then the doctor did something radical. The doctor got up and walked to the other side of the room. To Dorothy's surprise, he turned on the radio and asked what her favorite station was. More confused than ever, she stammered out the station number and turned it to that station. He then walked back to his chair and sat down. What was he doing? But moments later, she couldn't believe what she was witnessing. It was like night and day. Aiden looked down and immediately pulled his pants down and stared downwards. But why was he doing it now rather than a few moments ago? The doctor smiled. It seemed that he knew more than he was letting on. But once he was confident enough to give his explanation to Dorothy, she was rocked to her core. The doctor explained his hypothesis to the concerned mother. He asked if Dorothy had the radio on every day around noon. She nodded in response. That's when the doctor's smile got even broader. He had definitely cracked the case wide open. But what did the radio have to do with his behavior? Your son is just trying to dance along to the radio. The poor guy doesn't know how to dance yet, though, so this is his closest way to express his feelings. Dorothy had to stop her jaw from hitting the floor. Was this all really just because Aiden was trying to express himself? She couldn't believe it. The doctor told her that he would grow out of it with a little bit of encouragement, so Dorothy signed him up for baby dance classes. He learned the proper way of dancing and never unexpectedly dropped his pants again.